Welcome.
Shalom.
Shalom. Okay, let's get started.
Well, I just want to invite everybody and welcome you to this really interesting study. It's going to be from Acts chapters 20 to 24. I'm titling it Paul's Pentecost Appointment at Jerusalem and the Battle of the Calendars. And like I've mentioned, this is a three-part study. Part 3 of 3, Paul's Pentecost Appointment at Jerusalem. And this is where we're going to find out about the Battle of the Calendars. Maybe there's something more going on than just an Omer count. Let's continue. I just want to do a little bit of an overview for you as we chart Paul's journey, because all of the information that you've received so far is going to help you with what we're going to end up with. So far, we have considered all the necessary information with many maps of Paul's third journey. We have looked at every individual location. We've considered reasonable distances between Philippi to Jerusalem. We've considered reasonable calculations for walking, waiting times, and sailing conditions from the various ports. We have read the calendar language in Acts chapters 20 to 24 that is supposed to bring everything together so that we know the calendar details. So we've done all of that so that we should be ready now to chart these Omer counts. But first, before we do that, we're going to have a short lesson on meteorology for this trip. And then it is time to chart the Omer count on the calendar months according to all of these timing details. But I want you to note that nothing about this return trip to Jerusalem has been purposely advanced to assure that we had a 50-day Omer count because of Paul's urgency to get there, and it hasn't been delayed to have a 99-day count. But Paul wants to be in Jerusalem, if at all possible, for Pentecost. So we haven't pushed anything so that we can make sure we have our 50-day Omer count according to Moses and Joshua and Yahushua's calendar in the Gospels. So the question is, what will the Omer count actually be? And will we find something else? But before setting sail with Paul, we need to understand this journey to Jerusalem. Paul and his traveling companions would have had to have some basic knowledge and information before planning this trip. If they wanted to be on time for Pentecost, they had to know something. And the following information from the web is on weather patterns of the Aegean and the Mediterranean seas. And this is the fun part. It's along with some verification from our local Captain Buddy Jones right here in Anaheim Lake. We've known him for over 20 years. He knew Tim's mom and dad when they used to live out here at Nimple Lake. And I needed to call up Captain Buddy Jones to find out if what I was finding and researching was actually making sense. He's 80 years old now. He just retired 3 years ago from being a sea captain for 66 years. So I figured he just might have an idea about what's going on with this part of the journey. I told him it was a study in the book of Acts. I told him all about it. And I said I needed to have some clarification from him because I wasn't completely sure I was on the right track. And he said to me, "You are absolutely on the right track." He said, "Yes, you are. It's going to be fun." But let's just do just one slide here on these two journeys that Paul has taken between Troas and Neapolis. Remember I told you the one in Acts 16, that journey of 140 miles was done in only 2 days of sailing. It says, therefore, loosing from Troas, okay, they're going from Troas, we came with a straight course to Samothracia, and the next day to Neapolis. And Neapolis is like very close to Philippi. You can see it. Neapolis is there, and then you just walk a little bit to Philippi. So that was about 5 years before, okay? They had this journey, and it only took 2 days. So they must have had stronger winds blowing from the south. Okay, that was at a different time of the year than what we're doing right now. In this journey, it tells us in verse 6, we already read it, that they sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and it came to Troas in 5 days. So they were only traveling about 70 or 28 miles per day instead of 70 miles per day. Okay, so this is at a different time of the year. Absolutely, we know it's in the spring. So isn't it interesting that Luke put this information in here so that Theophilus and his first readers would know that they had some other things to deal with on this trip. So you just remember that for the rest of the study. Okay, how does Acts 20 link to meteorology, this 5-day trip? Well, Paul's return to Jerusalem is like on his third trip, and we already know that he's using many sailing vessels that depend on the winds for movement from port to port. And during portions of this spring trip, the winds in this area of the earth, they're called etesians. What is the definition of etesians? This is the English word for the Greek word meltemi. The etesians are strong annual prevailing winds that blow from the north over large parts of Greece, the Aegean Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. Remember, they're blowing from the north. The wind experienced at any given location is going to be highly dependent on the local topography. If you have plains, you're going to have probably stronger winds. If you have mountains, it will slow the wind down. That's what that's talking about. Well, what is the time of the year for the etesians? These winds occur from the end of May to October, and they become very strong in June and July when it gets very warm. Winter winds are not called etesians, only these winds here from the end of May to October. And during a strong etesian, the trough may extend relatively far to the west beyond Rhodes. You remember where Rhodes is, even all the way to the island of Crete, and it can form a closed low pressure, resulting in almost calm winds at Rhodes. Remember, we saw where Rhodes was. Well, what's the time of the day for etesians? I asked Captain Buddy Jones about this, as I didn't understand this stuff. These winds mostly blow during the day. Look, from around 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and they're strongest around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I found this information. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I asked Captain Buddy Jones, I said, is this true? Because I'm kind of finding, they left at dawn, they left in the morning. And he said, yes, it's true. He said, often the winds will die down very quickly after sundown, and they're going to be back at dawn. Under the influence of the sea breeze during the day, the etesians become stronger locally, as was the case in northern Crete. What is the length of the etesians? Well, there's something interesting that sea captains know about these winds. They know if the winds on the first day blow all night long, they can often blow for many days, day and night, for up to 10 days. Let's look at point number 5. What is the speed of etesians? Well, these winds are usually moderate. However, they can get very strong, like a gale-like force, and they can reach maximum wind speeds in the early afternoon. And you better be careful if you're on the sea, especially if you're sailing just in a little boat. What is the force and the intensity of etesians? Well, like I said, the winds are weaker in May, and this is more towards the end of May, not the beginning, and they can reach an intensity of force 6. By the end of May, they can be up to force 7, and they can get to force 8 for a few hours during the hot hours of the day. Now, just in case you don't know what a force is, because I didn't know, Captain Beaufort, long time ago, he charted out what these forces are, and this is a chart, or information that captains use even today still. So force 2 is around 6 miles per hour. So your ship might be going about 4 to 7 miles per hour if you have force 2. Force 3 are gentle winds. They can be 10 miles per hour. That means that your ship might be able to make a speed of 8 to 12 miles per hour. You can see force 5. It's getting up to 22 miles per hour. Here's force 6, very strong, 28. Force 7 is also strong, 35 miles per hour. And force 8 is called a gale wind, 43 miles per hour. You don't want to be in a little sailing boat when this is going to happen. So from about mid-May to October, the winds become stronger. And don't forget, they're stronger in the hot part of the summer months, and they're stronger in the mid-afternoon. But remember that we're sailing from after the days of unleavened bread dates to Pentecost. So we're looking at dates in April to the end of May. And these winds, I'm saying, at that point in time could be around force 3. So we're going to use that information with our reasonable assessments. These strong Etesian winds do not occur in April or Abib or early May for really good sailing. I found another chart that had many, many locations. I picked out 2 that we're familiar with, which is Samos and Rhodes, okay? And it's got April, May, June here just for some comparison. Look what happens at Samos in April. The winds are around 7.5 miles per hour, okay? That's about how fast you can travel. In May, it bumps up to around 9. Okay, that's what we saw with Captain Beaufort. And Rhodes, that's a little bit further out. It's out in some bigger areas of water. The winds can get up to about 12.5 miles per hour. And in May, they can bump up to about 15. But we can't use 9 and we can't use 15. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to take an average of about 10 miles per hour for wind speed for the beginning of May. We'll just take an average and see how we do. There's another point that captains often take note of, and that is that by the high season of the Etesian, this is usually in July, a Multemi is heralded by, this is what they watch for, scattered altocumulus or orographic clouds. They watch the sky for those kinds of clouds. A day before arrival. These clouds will show up a day before the winds. They will also watch for a sudden drop in humidity, and they will watch for a rise in atmospheric pressure. These are the things that a captain will watch for so he knows what he's doing with his ship. Now, it could be that by mid-May of Paul's homeward journey, some of the navigating was determined by clouds, indicating that the Etesians are coming, and that would affect their sailing time. Well, I asked Captain Buddy about this, and he said, oh, yes. He said, we watch the clouds. We sure do. We know what's coming if we watch the clouds. Well, I didn't know that, but I didn't know what an orographic cloud was. And this is a cloud that's going to develop in response to the forced air of lifting by the Earth's topography. You can see here a huge mountain. And so when these air currents come over and they just form a great big cloud here at the top, and then of course the air current comes down. Here's some pictures of what an orographic cloud might look like, some different pictures. You can see this bottom one here, how they're hovering over the mountaintops. When you see a cloud like that, you know you're going to have some wind. Okay. Let's go on and look at the altocumulus clouds because they're a little bit different. These clouds usually form by a convection in an unstable layer aloft, which may result from gradual lifting of air in advance of a cold front. So you can see when the air comes up over the mountaintop, these are just little currents of air up and down, and it forms these little tiny clouds like little cotton ball puffs. And when you see these form in the sky, I've seen these. When you see these, you know that there's going to be something coming. And usually it's a thunderstorm later in the day. And Captain Jones, he confirmed that sea captains know how to read the clouds in the sky for their sailing days and what to expect. He said, oh yes, he said, Charlene, over there in the Aegean and the Mediterranean Sea, absolutely, they're going to be watching the sky. So that could have been some of the things that the sea captain was watching while they were on this trip back to Jerusalem. So we're going to set sail with Paul to Jerusalem. And these few things that need to be considered before we begin the chart, I have given them to you in great detail, and Luke has too, so that you can know what's happening with this return journey back to Jerusalem. Along with the scriptures that have been read, we should now be ready to chart the details on the covenant calendar. We're going to start with this Passover Spring Festival. And a note of interest, Luke has given details in puzzle fashion so that we can know exactly when the days of unleavened bread have ended. We're going to know exactly when Passover was. So we are now ready to chart the Omer count on the calendar months. Take a big breath, everybody. We're going to start in the first month I will call it Abib. We're leaving Philippi for Troas. Let me just explain how these Omer charts are going to work so that you can get an understanding. I will pop the boxes. I will pop them out if there's something important happening, okay? I've already told you that Passover was on a third cycle. I haven't proven it yet because we haven't got all the details, but I will just show you. Passover here is on the third cycle of Tuesday. We all know that the first Sabbath of unleavened bread is the very next day. That is the only high Sabbath. We also know we have to get to the first weekly Shabbat, and the day after the first weekly Shabbat, everyone, you already know that that is Wave Sheaf right there, the day that follows the weekly Shabbat within the Passover festival, not outside the Passover festival. That happens to be the fifth day of the unleavened bread. There are 7 altogether. So the 7th day of unleavened bread, and it's actually the second feast Sabbath of unleavened bread, is going to be on a third cycle on a Tuesday. This is where we're going to pick up our charting right here, right after unleavened bread. What it says is, we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and we came unto them to Troas in 5 days. Take note, it doesn't say many days after unleavened bread, it says after. So we're not going to wait. We're going to use that clue and start the morning after. We know that we need to have 5 days to get to Troas. So what I'm going to show you on the charts, you will always have a week. The former week will be shown in lesser detail, and the major week that we're talking will be on the bottom row. I will try to give you a map of each place that we go to. So let's go to the next month. In fact, this chart is going to chart from the month of Abib to the second month, as called Ziph, okay? We have our 5 days of sailing up here on the former week. That gets us to Omer count number 7. Everyone follow the Omer counts, okay? I'm not so concerned about the day of the month right now, the Omer counts. It's on Omer number 8, which is the 5th day, and they actually come into Troas on that day. It says, and we came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode for 7 days. These are clues. So here we'll start with Troas day number 1 on Omer number 9. Of course, it's easy to count 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and we're at Omer count number 14. So as we go to the next chart, we will pick up from Omer count number 14, and we will now start at Omer count 15. This is Acts 20, verse 7. This is where Paul's sermon was all night long till dawn in Troas, where he was ready to depart the morrow. And remember, this is where Eutychus fell out of the window and all that excitement. That was day number 7. Now here's the calendar clue, okay? Look what it says. And upon the first day of the week, where the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow. And he continued his speech until midnight. Aren't you glad we already did those verses? So now you're seeing it charted on the calendar. And in verse 11, it says, he talked a long while, even till the break of day. Now, there's a very important note here. The calendar detail that this event occurred on the first day of the week is very important information. And it's going to show you that Tuesday, or the third cycle, was Passover. And guess what, everybody? This is in the year of 57 AD. We're going to go through that with a fine-tooth comb. Now, just in case you kind of got lost, let's go and count out these 12 days. There was 5 days of sailing, 7 days at Troas. We need to count out these 12 days from this first day of the week to see if we've got our charting right, to see if we've got Passover where it belongs. So on this chart, it's a little bit different than all the rest. We're going to establish the Passover weekly cycle. This is the only a chart that's going to have 4 weeks in a row, okay? So take a look. I said Passover was going to be here. Unleavened bread Sabbath is on the 4th cycle. Go all the way to your weekly Sabbath, and you have your wave sheaf right here on Abib 19, and it's Omer count number 1. And we still have to finish out our days of unleavened bread. That's Omer count number 3. And that they left the next day, not many days after they left, okay? And then what did it tell us? They were on the ship for 5 days, and then they spent 7 days in Troas. You can chart this all out. You can see it. We're counting all of the Omer counts, okay? We get all the way up to Omer 15, and that was the 7th day in Troas. That's where Paul preached all night. Hope you can see that. Now, I'm sure you can see it, but let's work the count backwards from Omer number 15. The first day backwards count. There you land at Omer count number 9. That was where they started their Troas visit. Now we're going to count back from Omer 9, 5 sailing days to Wednesday, Omer count number 4. And the next thing we know is that Omer count number 3 was indeed the 7th unleavened bread day. It was the final day of the spring festival. They honored that day, and they got ready to leave the next morning. Remember, the ships are going to leave in the morning when the winds pick up. So it's not hard to figure out that the Passover that year was on the 3rd cycle. It was on a Tuesday. That's the easy part. But the part that I want you to think about is there proof that this year really was 57 AD, not some year between 59 and 60? And why would I ask you to think about that? Because now we're going to go on and we're going to chart these Omer counts one day at a time. Anything that we left behind, I will have it in a light gray, okay? Just so that you have something there to know where you were at. But we will pick up on the boxes that are popped and that have color in them. It says in chapter 20, verses 11 to 13, that Paul talked a long while, even till break of day. So he departed by foot. So it's on Omer the 16th, where he departs on foot. He's on his way to Assos, and the others sail, and they pick up Paul at Mytilene. Now we're going to use some reasonable estimates here. I'm just going to say that walking for Paul, he's got around 20 miles to go. Let's say he's going at 3 miles per hour because he was probably a little bit tired after preaching all night. I say that he's going to need around 6.5 hours for his journey at the least. And if he leaves in the morning at break of day, he could get there around noon or 1 o'clock. But the others are sailing. They have 60 miles to go, and their ship has probably got a wind speed of around 7.5 miles per hour. Well, just do the calculations. They're going to need at least 8 hours to get around this cape and to meet Paul at Assos. And I'm saying that if they left at dawn when the wind started, that's going to be around 2 o'clock. And in verse 14, it says that Paul met with us at Assos, and we took him in and came to Mytilene. So it appears that they didn't waste any time. This is in the afternoon. I'm sure they would have had some winds, and they took off. This is a major part of the whole calendar puzzle. So it appears to me that they only stopped for a very short while, and then they carried on through this very dangerous passage for about another 5.5 hours before those winds would die down at sunset. They wanted to get to Mytilene, and that's exactly what happened. Now, we are going to spend about 5 to 6 slides on this Mytilene moon of Omer the 16th. I hope you noticed that we had charted them to be at Mytilene on Omer 16th. Everyone, this is a major piece. This is the piece that you're going to want to pay attention to. I'm picking up from slide 29 when we talked about Mytilene, and remember we asked the question, was there a dark moon or not? Was it a dark sky? Was it cloudy skies? I'll tell you the reason why I asked the question. because I didn't know. And I really did go look at some other commentators. I didn't know what was going on here. And other commentators were saying that it was a dark moon. Well, I thought, well, maybe it wasn't a dark moon. Maybe it was just a cloudy sky and it was maybe just a dark night. But we shall see, because I couldn't trust those commentators. I don't know what they're using for a calendar. And I wouldn't want you to trust them either. Well, Paul is boarding the ship on Omer 16 from Assos, and he's on his way to sail to Mytilene. At this point, it becomes very crucial to know what's happening with this sail. Remember, I said to you that there's many that say that this was a night of a dark moon. Now that could be a conjunction, or it could be a first sliver or a second sliver. That's still a pretty dark night, okay? A dark moon is what they call it. And I'm saying, was it a dark moon or was it not? And how can we know? How could we ever know this? Luke doesn't write a single thing about that. So we're going to do a further investigation right now, and I'm going to tell you we might be in for some surprises. We're looking at a placement year of this third journey. I felt that 59 to 60 was really quite a span of time, but wasn't there a very specific year? We're choosing 57 AD for the facts, and here's the reason why. We now know that Paul's calendar year, that year, had a third cycle Tuesday Passover. It is exactly the same calendar as what Moses had during the year of the Exodus. And I'm saying that this is a pillar calendar year. This is very important. And after quite a huge search, I narrowed this down to 57 AD as the only year that qualifies. Any year between 58 to 63 does not qualify at all. You cannot use years before this because there was many other things that Paul did. So we have you can't use anything ahead of time. There's not enough time to put his other two journeys in there from the time that he was called to be an apostle to the Gentiles. Let's look at this. We have the Tekufa on all of these years was March the 22nd. I gathered this information from Time and Date. It's a very reliable source, okay? Tekufa on March the 22 on covenant calendar. That means that March the 23rd, according to covenant calendar, is the first day of the first month. Abib 14 is going to be on April 5th. This is Passover. If you count 14 days from March the 23rd, you will have Passover on April the 5th. Then you all know you have to get to the Shabbat in that week, and the next day is the wave sheaf. That's going to be on April the 10th on this calendar. That is wave sheaf. That's where Omer count number 1 begins. Remember we said that Mytilene was Omer number 16. That happens to be April the 25th, right there. This is covenant calendar. We're going to be going over this a little bit more, so you don't have to remember it all right now. But I do want to make a note here that 57 AD qualifies on many different levels, not just one. I'm going to show you a few of them. Let's go to the next slide. And we're still asking the question, where was this Mytilene moon on Omer the 16th? Remember, it's a major piece of the puzzle here. I've given you all this information about covenant calendar. So now let's take a look at the moons, because when you go to Time and Date, you can pull up this calendar and it has the moons on them. This dark moon here is the conjunction. At this time of the year, you can see that April 22 is the time of the conjunction. That's going to be the 24th. That is Omer the 15th. The second sliver is going to be on April the 25th. That's Omer number 16. Do you remember I said many commentators declare it was a dark moon for Paul at Mytilene? Now, how in the world would they know that if they weren't following covenant calendar? That was my next question. How would they know that? And I'm pretty sure that most of these commentators don't know about covenant calendar because we haven't really found anything from them that says that they do know about covenant calendar. So the question is, would you believe the commentators without any detailed evidence? Would you just say, yeah, I'll go with that? Or would you have to test it out? Well, I'm saying I'm not going to believe them. But I want to know where that Mytilene moon was. I want to know more. So I decided maybe we should go look at a lunar calendar. Now I'm just going to let you look at this for a little bit, because on the next slide, we're going to break it open wide. With the lunar calendar, and this is with the moon following the equinox, not the moon before the equinox. They have a conjunction here on March the 24th. Very interesting timing. And according to this, it does look like Mytilene is going to have a pretty dark moon on the lunar calendar. So let's examine this on a larger scale so we can see exactly what is happening between the lunar calendar and the covenant calendar in this very year of 57 AD. And I want you to ask the question, is there enough evidence to prove that the lunar calendar is true? Because that's the battle of the calendars. You all know it. The lunar calendars are saying that they're the true calendar, and we're saying no, it's the blood-ratified covenant calendar of Moses in Torah that is smacked by Joshua, that is given complete emphasis in the Gospels, and here we are with Paul. Where was the Mytilene moon on Omer the 16th? That is April the 25th. Please come with me. First, we're going to chart the covenant calendar dates. Right there on March the 22nd is the Tekufa, and the day after, March the 23rd, is the first day of the first month. You go 14 days and you will get to April 5 as Passover. Go to the weekly Sabbath, and the next day is Wave Sheaf, and that's Omer count 21. Number one, not 21, number one. And then the next week, it would be Omer count number 8. The 24th would be Omer count 15. And the 25th is Omer count 16. That's where they were at Mytilene stop. Okay, let's look now at the lunar calendar. This is a lunar calendar with the moon that follows the equinox. We're going to show you what is happening. Remember, I told you that there is a conjunction. There's a dark moon on the 24th of March. This follows the Tekufa. You need at least 2 days to get to a first sliver. So that would be the 26th. And when you count out 14 days, this gives you a Friday Passover on the lunar calendar with your unleavened bread on the Shabbat. That is Abib 15. And on Abib 16, you have April 10th. This is the wave sheaf. Remember, this is the wave sheaf for covenant calendar. Well, guess what? It's also the wave sheaf on the lunar calendar. And they start here with their count on Abib 16. Yes, it's Abib 16 for them on the lunar calendar. And you count 16 days, and they're going to get Omer count number 16 on the 25th at Mytilene. Okay, well, let's keep looking. What else can we find? We're going to look once again at where's the dark moon in this month of April. We've already done this. It's the conjunction is on the 22nd right there. You need to have at least 1 day and then 2 days to get to your first sliver. And the second sliver, of course, is going to be on Omer count number 16. So according to the lunar calendar, would this have been a dark moon night? Absolutely, it was a dark moon night. There's not too much light from a second day sliver moon. And if there's clouds, you're not going to have any light at all. Well, the conclusion is that Mytilene did have a pretty dark moon on Omer 16. That is according to covenant calendar, and that's according to a lunar calendar. That's very interesting. In fact, you know what is absolutely amazing? That the lunar festal calendar arrives at exactly the same conclusion as the covenant calendar for the placement of wave sheaf and the Omer 16 count. and both of them align with the overnight stay at Mytilene. That's really incredible. Now, before I go any further, I do just want to make a note that in the Joshua Wave Sheaf series, in part 2 of that series, we show that what was happening with the lunar calendar at that time is that the wave sheaf, many years later, around 160 AD with Rashbi, was actually married to Abib 16 every single year. And we know that Abib 16 can be on any day of the week, but they married the wave sheaf to Abib 16. So it didn't matter where Abib 16 was, they married it to wave sheaf. Okay, I don't know that that was happening at this point in time. In fact, I don't think it was, because this was all connected to Rashbi and his death. You can go look at that. We're going to show you that in just a bit. But what I want to do right now, I want to ask you this question. Is it evident that there was a battle between the calendars right here? Do you think that there is a battle between calendars, a battle between the covenant calendar and the lunar calendar? And I'm going to say, absolutely, there is a battle going on here. Now, Luke and Paul did not have to give this evidence in the book of Acts. But you know what? They knew there was a battle going on with the calendars. They already knew it. That's why this got recorded. I'm absolutely convinced. Because we don't need a fourth witness to know what the Omer count is. We have a witness in Torah, we have a witness from Joshua, and Yahusha should be the final witness of all. We don't need to have a fourth witness to know how to count the Omer, that it's only 50 days and not 99 days. I 100% totally believe that Luke and Paul had this calculated, and they put in so much detail. In fact, Luke even recorded Paul's words in his testimony so that you would know what was going on, because there's a battle of calendars going on here. And this particular witness is showing you which calendar they were on. Honest to goodness it is, because they're not going to be on a lunar calendar. Now, for those of you that are new, you're probably a little bit lost, but if you would just look at this study on Joshua and the wave sheaf, there's 2 parts to it. I've left the links here. It will show you that in year 160 AD, how the death of Rashbi cemented the marriage of Abib 16 to wave sheaf. And that's where covenant calendar and lunar calendars definitely part. Okay, so there is a lot of evidence going on here that there is a battle of calendars. I do not believe that this study was written down just to give us a 50-day Omer count. There's way more going on than that. A dark Mytilene moon on 2 calendars? Really? 2 calendars? These 2 calendars of the covenant and the lunar calendar, they're very different calendars. And they're coming to exactly the same conclusion for Omer 16. Is there more discussion that is needed here? And I'm telling you, friends, there is a lot more discussion that's needed. It's not going to be in this study today. But this puzzle is a calendar cruncher. It's a calendar cruncher that can only be solved by the blood-ratified covenant calendar. How? Not going to tell you today. That's going to be coming in future studies. But there is a battle between the Torah covenant calendar and the lunar calendar. I'm calling it the calendar crunch. Okay. Let's return back to our study, because we're only at Omer 16. And we now know that Mytilene had a pretty dark moon. And if there was any clouds in the sky, it absolutely was a dark night. So in verse 15, Luke goes on to say that we sailed thence and we came the next day over against Chios. So Omer 17, they're at Chios. If they're sailing 70 miles to Chios and they're only going about 7.5 miles per hour, we know that this is going to be a full day sail. They're going to start in the morning. They're going to be sailing all day long till sunset, till their winds quit. And we're going to see an arrival at Samos. Yes, they do get down to Samos. This is on Omer the 18th. It says the next day we arrived at Samos, And 5 kilometers later, or actually it's about 5 miles later, they tarried at Trogyllium. And we know now that it was approximately a dark sky because they aren't very far away from Mytilene. Remember, at 70 miles to Samos, they're going to have like an all-day sail. They're going to be on the boat all day, hoping that their winds do not die down. And then we're going to go on to Omer the 19th. They have a 45-mile sail from Trogyllium and to arrive the next day at Miletus. We already know that they tarried at Trogyllium, and it says the next day we came to Miletus. Well, you know what? It's a pretty dangerous little passage to get through, and they've only got 45 miles to go, but I have a feeling it probably took them at least 6 hours to get down to Miletus. So they've used a whole day. These are dangerous passages to navigate. We're now looking at Omer the 19th. Remember, Paul's going to send some delegates to go up to Ephesus to call the elders down, and we've already determined that they need to cross the Gulf of Latmus, and then they have 38 miles to trek to get all the way up to Ephesus. So I have here on Omer the 19th that they've arrived at Miletus. It could be around noon or 1 o'clock. 2 delegates are on their way. I'm sure they would have had to catch a ferry or wait for a ferry or whatever. It's about 10 miles across that waterway. And then I think that they would have had time to walk about 10 miles further that day out of the 38 in order to get to Ephesus. So that's what probably happened on Omer the 19th. On Omer the 20th, they still have some miles to go. It's around 20 miles to walk. I'm saying that they start out early. Maybe they had a lot of energy and they could really walk 4 miles per hour. And if they could do that and keep up the pace, they would be walking around 5.5 hours. And that would put them into Ephesus. And remember, this is a preparation cycle. It's a Friday. I think it would put them into Ephesus in probably the later afternoon or the evening on this 6th cycle. Now, I think that they probably would have had good Roman roads, but they could have had some mountain terrain, some up and down, because the Mycale Mountains, remember this is a big mountain range, the Mycale Mountains are in here. So on Friday, they're coming into Ephesus. It's very interesting, the timing of when they get to Ephesus. They got there just in time for Omer 21, which happened to be the weekly Sabbath, and no doubt they spent time with the Ephesian elders and probably rested up from all their walking. And they all knew that they had to prepare for a 2-day walk back to Miletus to have this one last visit with Paul. So that's Omer 21. We are now going to pick up the rest of the calendar at Omer 22. And of course, they're walking. This is the first 2 days of their walk to meet with Paul. And I'm going to say that they probably could walk about 20 miles of the 38 on this first day. They've got lots of energy. And then on Omer count number 23, I do believe that this would have been the day that they would have come in to meet up with Paul, and the elders had their time with him. He had so much to share with them before the boarding of the ship. They would have had to board in the evening, so they were ready to go in the morning for the morning sail. So they had some time. They probably only had a few hours. But what does it say in chapter 21, verse 1? And it came to pass after we were gotten from them, in other words, after we finally got away from them, the elders were just clinging to them. They probably had just one more thing to say, but it says after we had gotten from them and had launched. They got into the boat. They were ready to prepare to leave for Kos the next morning. So let's look at Omer 25. On Omer 24, first of all, that's the day that they're sailing to Kos, about 40 miles. And remember, look at Kos. It's right in all those intricate passages. They probably didn't have a lot of strong winds being tucked away there, so close to the coast. But I'm saying that it probably took them most of the day to get there, and they probably would have anchored for the night because they didn't have a night wind at this point in time of the season. The next day, they travel 85 miles. Look at that, 85 miles from Kos to arrive at Rhodes. So they've traveled twice the distance this time. Well, it means that they had either a longer day of sailing or they had higher winds. I don't know which one it was, but they went twice the distance. And you can understand that coming through now this open sea, they probably had higher winds and they were traveling a little bit faster, but they would have dropped anchor there for the night. It says that they came with a straight course onto Kos, and look what it says. And the following day, they came into Rhodes. The following day. We're picking up here. Here's Rhodes, okay? 70 miles from Rhodes. They're on their way to Patara now. But there's a couple things that are happening here. Because of Patara's location, this was also likely a very huge shipyard for the sea traffic that was going from east to west. Remember, I told you that? So that would have been a really important stop. Every ship would have stopped there no matter what. But it does say that from Rhodes, they came into Patara. Well, 70 miles from Rhodes to Patara, they arrive the following day. That's going to put them at Omer 26. And I do believe that they would have anchored there for the night. That would have been a long sail. Now we're halfway through our Omer count. Omer is up to 50. We're halfway through now, but we still have over 500 miles left to go. We still have over half the journey. And the question always is, will Paul arrive in time for Pentecost or not? So let's pick up from Omer 26 as we go on to Omer 27. It says in 21, verses 2 and 3, that they were to find a ship sailing over to Phoenicia. And it said they went abroad and they set forth towards Cyprus. This is about 250 miles until they get to Cyprus. Okay, so they did find a ship. I don't know how long it took for them to find a ship. There was probably many ships there, but they had to find one that was going over to Syria. And they boarded and they prepared to leave in the morning of Omer 27. And it said that they passed Cyprus on the left. So let's look at Omer 27. And I do believe that in this part of the sailing here, we're now in the open Mediterranean. I do believe that our winds are going to be a little bit stronger. I do believe that they had at least 10 hours of good sailing, and we're just making a reasonable estimate that they probably could sail about 100 miles that day. They have over 400 miles to go. On Omer 28th, which happened to be a Sabbath, they were on the ship. Of course, if the winds die down at night, which is what Captain Buddy told me, that seems to be what happens, unless you have winds with an Etesian, but they probably were just becalmed for the night. But let's just say that on this Sabbath that they actually did sail another 10 hours, about another 100 miles. So that's Omer 28. Let's pick up now with Omer 29. They're still sailing. Again, the winds do die down at sunset and off they go in the morning. And I'm thinking that they probably had another 10 hours to go. But this time they have something interesting happening. They are coming closer to Cyprus. And yesterday, the day before on Omer 28, they were only about 50 miles away from Cyprus. So I'm saying that they probably got to Cyprus around 11 o'clock or noontime, because it said they passed Cyprus on the left. On Omer number 30, they're setting sail again. They're trying to clean up these 400 plus miles that they have to sail. And I do believe that they probably came into Tyre sometime around on the next day. I think on Omer count number 30, they were very, very close to Tyre. So let's look and see what's happening. We should read this note on the map too. They have 200 of the 400 miles were already covered. On the other Omer counts of 27 and 28, but now we have some stronger winds, so we're just planning to get into Tyre on time. Let's look at Omer count number 31. I do believe that they probably arrived at Tyre probably earlier in the day if they set out at dawn, and the disciples, the people that were traveling together, they went and found the other disciples in Tyre, and it does give us some information that they tarried here in Tyre for 7 days. Luke also says we landed at Tyre, for there the ship was to unlade her burden. So obviously the ship is bringing cargo or picking up cargo cargo, letting off passengers, picking up passengers. And then it says, and finding disciples, we tarried at Tyre for 7 days. Okay, so there's day 1, Tyre day 2, we count out these days, and we get up to Omer count number 35. We're getting really close to the Pentecost 50 count. We have one more note here. There are only 20 days left till Pentecost. So the question I always had to keep asking was, if Paul was in such a hurry, why did he tarry in Tyre for 7 days once he was in the Levant? Like, that just didn't make sense to me. I just didn't really understand why this always said he was in such a hurry. But anyway, we've got our first 5 of 7 days right here. We're finishing at Omer 35. Let's go on and pick up Omer 36. At Omer 36, we have this here to read. It says, and when we accomplished those days, we departed and we went on our way. But that's at Omer 37. At Omer 36, counsel is given to Paul not to go up to Jerusalem because his life is in danger. And Paul says, no problem, I'm all ready to go. That's what happened on Omer 36. On Omer 37, when we read the scriptures, the friends go with Paul to the ship. Paul and the companions, they knelt with him on the seashore there, and they prayed with him, and they said goodbye because they really felt it would be the last time that they would see him. And they take a ship to sail to Ptolemais the very next day. 25 miles is what they have to sail on Omer 38 from Tyre to Ptolemais. And I'm saying that they could have arrived around 9 o'clock in the morning. They probably got off around 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning with a reasonable estimate. But it says that we came and stayed with the brethren for 1 day. Right there in 21 verse 7, we came to Ptolemais and abode with the brethren for 1 day. That was Omer count number 38. I think we're ready to pick up Omer count number 39. Here we are on this box that's popped. It says, the very next day we departed and we came to Philip's house and we abode with him. In verse 10, we tarried there many days. This is where I want you to pay attention. Remember when they left after the days of unleavened bread? It didn't say many days and then they left, but here it says we tarried there many days. Well, why would that be? I'm saying if it's 30 miles from Ptolemais to Caesarea and they're walking, okay, all of them are walking, and they get there the next day, I'm saying that they probably got in the early afternoon around 4 o'clock if they left in the morning. It's 30 miles, so at 3 miles per hour, it's a pretty long day of walking. And they're probably carrying all their luggage just like they were before. But we have some other things to think about. Their next stop is going to be Jerusalem. It's 65 miles away, and this is at least a 3-day walk from Caesarea. After a Sabbath fellowship, the travelers would leave on the first cycle so that they would avoid Sabbath travel. This is where I'm saying that I do believe that they stayed, it says many days. If they would have stayed these 2 days of 5th and 6th cycle, that's a Thursday and a Friday, we know they wouldn't have packed up on Shabbat to start walking to Jerusalem. So I do believe that they stayed Omer 40, 41, and 42. Don't you think that they would have stayed with the assembly on Shabbat and told them all the good news? Yes, they tarried there for a few extra days, Omer 39 to 42. So let's count out those days, 1, 2, and 3 days. And then, well, the next question is, what roads did they take to get down to from Caesarea to Jerusalem? Because as you know, there's a lot of roads here. There's all kinds of roads that they could have taken. And I'm thinking, well, what kind of roads would they have taken? They have many different choices. And I'm just using my reasonable assessment. I'm going to say that they took a route from Caesarea that would have gone down this way. You can see it's a very, very popular route. It's probably a very good road to Antipatris. And then I believe that they would have carried on down to Jerusalem. And there's probably more assemblies here for them to stop and meet with or to have an overnight stay. I didn't see too much happening on the coast from Caesarea to Joppa. That is a choice. And then they could have gone down to Lydda, down to Emmaus, and over to Jerusalem. That would have been a 3-day walk as well. But for some reason, I have a feeling that they kind of went through Antipatris. So I'm saying that if they have an average walk of 3 miles per hour, that this last leg of the journey would have to be at least a 3-day journey for them to get to Jerusalem. And I do believe that they probably got to Antipatris on the first day, and then they probably went to Bethel. This is their second day of walking. I'm sure they would have been tired. They probably would have found somebody to rest with at Bethel. And then on the third day, they would have arrived in Jerusalem. And remember, they've got friends all along the way for night lodging. And these friends would open up their homes and they would have a place to stay. If not, they would have to spend the night somewhere on the road. But now the interesting part is that in just a few days, Paul's going to be traveling this very same road again, but this time with a Roman guard. So we're ready to pick up our calendar count. They pack up and leave. Caesarea for Jerusalem, I believe that is on Omer count 43. That's just 1 week before Pentecost on 50. And I believe that that was day 1 of 3. The second day, they would have still continued their journey to Jerusalem, another 7 hours of walking, probably getting down to Bethel. And then on the third day is when they arrived at Jerusalem, is what I'm thinking. It would have been a lot of walking. And that's where they met with the brethren and they were gladly received. But there is a big surprise for them on Omer 46. It's on the following day. This is what it says. On the following day, Paul went in with us onto James, and all the elders were present. This, I believe, was Omer 46. It's very interesting that this is the middle day of the week. That's very interesting to me. Let us just take a little bit of time to ponder. According to the very best of calculations, Paul did arrive in Jerusalem on Omer count 45. And then the next day he was with the elders. This is well before the 50th cycle Omer count. But our question is, was Paul actually in Jerusalem for Pentecost? Did he have the right count? Did something else happen? Was he actually in Jerusalem for Pentecost? Let's look and see. Well, first of all, let's gather up a little bit more information. Remember my puzzle man here? He's going to have some things to share with you. Number one, James and the elders were very, very happy with Paul's report of his ministry with the Gentiles. They were thrilled that the Gentiles were coming in to accept the gospel. They just couldn't believe it. They were working with the Jews, the unbelieving Jews. However, there are some other Asian Jews that were not so happy, and they also were attending Jerusalem for Pentecost. And these Asian Jews were circulating rumors that Paul was teaching so many of these Gentiles to ignore the decisions of the Acts 15 council. They didn't like that. They were circulating rumors. So James and the elders, they felt that if Paul would just join these 4 men that were finishing their Nazirite vow and pay their sacrificial expenses, that this would prove that he had not forsaken some important principles of Torah and Moses. Now, Paul didn't really agree to that, okay? But they were saying, you know, Paul, if you would just do that, you know, because you've come in from Gentile territory, you've been out there for a long, long time, you know, just maybe some of them are going to think that you're unclean, you know, because you've been working with all these Gentiles, and they just might be able to accuse you that you're unclean and you can't really enter the temple for worship. Like, why don't you just join these 4 men with this Nazirite vow, and that would kind of provide the necessary cleansing so that you would be purified. Like, that would probably be a good idea. And you know, Paul wasn't really fond of that idea one little bit. But he thought, well, what would it hurt, you know? So this purification is over a 7-day period. It has cleansings on day 3 and day 7. This is red heifer language here. And then along with the required sacrificial offerings and the cutting of one's hair, that would end the Nazirite vow. Now, I can't get into the sacrificial and offerings. We know the sacrifices were done away with, but apparently this was the way it was still working at this point in time, and it was money that brought in extra funds for the coffers of the temple. So I wish I could go into that much more, but we'll just have to leave it there for now. So let's take a look as we're winding down to this Omer 50 count. Luke 21:26, it says, Paul took the men, and the next day, that's going to be Omer 47. The arrangements were made on Omer 46. The next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until an offering should be offered for every one of them. I already explained this verse, that this is where he is making all of the arrangements, when they can have all of these sacrifices done. What's their appointment time? When can they get their hair cut? How can they make the arrangements for payment? This is what's happening on this very first day. He is saying, like, we need to make all these arrangements, because other people were having vows as well, probably especially for this time. So this was the day on Omer 47 where Paul entered the temple to make arrangements for all of the requirements for himself and these 4 men. That was day 1 of 7 of this vow. On day 48, Omer 48, the men, they stay at the temple. They got to stay there all 7 days, so that they can avoid defilement. That was the accusation in the first place. So they're going to stay right at the temple, and they had to have places to stay. So that's why they had to make arrangements. Do you have a place for 5 guys to stay for the next 7 days? Because this is what we're doing. They knew that if they were outside the temple and they were close to somebody that dropped dead, that they were automatically defiled. They could not take that risk. On Omer count 49, this would have been the 3rd day of their 7-day vow. And this is the day that they had the sprinkling of waters for purification. And this was just before Shavuot. This was the 3rd day of their 7 in the vow. So we count 1, 2, and 3. We need to have 4 more days of this vow. But before we do that, I just want you to take a look at 3 slides about this Nazirite vow, because I couldn't take time to break it open in detail, but I did find a little bit of information that is really interesting about this Nazirite vow at Jerusalem. Please let me read it to you. When it came to the Nazirite vow, each one could fix the length of time for their vow. Usually it was 30 days, and usually no more than 100 days. At the Feast of Pentecost, Paul took on himself the Nazirite vow as was recommended by James and the elders, as given in the following description. I'm going to read this description to you from a quote that I found, because there were some options for a Nazirite vow. Quote, the ceremonies involved took a longer time than Paul had at his disposal. Remember I said usually the vow was 30 days, or it could be 100. Well, he didn't have 30 days or 100. He only had a few days. So sometimes it could take longer, but he wasn't there in time. So let me start over. The ceremonies involved took a longer time than Paul had at his disposal. But the law permitted a man to share the vow if he could find companions who had gone through the prescribed ceremonies, and who permitted him to join their company. This permission was commonly granted on a condition: if the newcomer paid all the fees required for the whole company. These are the fees to the Levites for the cutting of the hair, and the fees for the sacrifices. There was probably a fee to stay there at the temple in a room. So whoever was coming into this Nazirite vow, they had to pay all these fees, but they would finish this vow along with the others. Okay, they would be just like they were already doing it for 30 days. 4 Jewish Christians were performing the vow, and they agreed to admit Paul to their company, and the provision was that he would pay the expenses. It was a pretty good deal. Okay, so Paul comes in and he joins the Nazirite vow. Yes, Paul consented He paid all the charges, and when the 7 last days of the vow began, he met with them to live in the temple, giving the usual notice to the priests that he had joined in regular fashion, and he was a sharer with the 4 men, and that his vow is going to end with theirs. The Nazarites retired to the temple during the last period of the 7 days because they would be secure there against any accidental defilement. This is from Lindsay's work on Acts. Very interesting information. So now let's go pick up our calendar. We were at Omer 49, and the very next day, according to Torah and Joshua and Yehusha in the Gospels, is going to be Omer count number 50 on Sivan 8. It's also very interesting that we have Paul and the 4 men are in the temple. This is the 4th day that they're in the temple. It's very interesting that this is the very middle of the week for their vow, and it's on Omer count number 50. This has to be Pentecost or Shavuot. Let's continue on and see what happens. Well, on the very next day, Paul and the 4 men, they're still in the temple on the 5th day. They've completed their 5th day of their vow of 7. And then the next day, which is Sivan 10, that is the 6th day of 7. And then, oh my goodness, what happens next? It tells us in Luke 21:27, and when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews, which were of Asia, and I'm linking it back to those in Ephesus, okay, and you know the reason why, when they saw Paul in the temple, they stirred up all the people and they laid hands on him because, remember, this is the 7th day of their vow. Here was their reasons. Paul had brought a converted Gentile into the temple. His name was Trophimus. He was an Ephesian. And the Jews of Ephesus, they knew Trophimus, and they felt that this act may have polluted and defiled the temple. He was probably a Gentile convert. They angrily removed Paul from the temple. They slammed shut the doors just in case the temple was polluted, that nobody else could go in there. And then they had very serious intentions to kill Paul, and that was foiled by the Roman captain. So we're at almost the end of these 7 days, and there's a lot of activity going on. Then it says, on the morrow, the Roman commander freed Paul from his bondage to appear before the Sanhedrin council. So this is on Sivan 12. He appears before the council with the chief priests, and he was in Roman custody at this time, so he was safe. In 23:10, and when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing that Paul would be torn to pieces, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks so he would be safe. And then on Sivan 13, it was the following night, is what Luke says, the night following, Paul has a vision from Yehusha that everything is going to be okay. And then Luke says, and when it was day, so now we're at Sivan 14. This is where the Jews made a vow that they were going to kill Paul no matter what. But the Romans figured it out before they got to it. In verse 23, we read already that Paul is moved with 200 soldiers, with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. And guess what day it was? It was Shabbat. It was 9 o'clock at night that the Romans decided to get Paul out of Dodge, okay? It was too dangerous to be there. Find that interesting that it was on the night of Shabbat. Very interesting. Rome is pretty serious about Paul's protection. When they discovered that Paul's life was in danger and that plans were made immediately by those Jews to kill him, they also made plans immediately to move out at the 3rd hour of the night. That would be 9 o'clock Roman time, with those 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen for the safety of Paul and night protection. And we know that they reached Antipatris by morning. It was 40 miles to that Roman destination. And even at 4 miles per hour, that would have been quite a long journey of at least 10 hours. But when did Paul arrive at Caesarea? Because that's where he's supposed to be going to. In Acts 23:32, Luke says, on the morrow. This would have been the 15th cycle of the 3rd month. On the morrow, in the morning, the soldiers left the horsemen to go on and continue with Paul up to Caesarea for those last 25 to 30 miles, and they returned to the castle. It was supposed to be in Caesarea that Paul was supposed to stand trial before Governor Felix. And now the question is, what in the world does all of this information have to do with the matter of whether or not Paul was in Jerusalem for Pentecost on Omer 50 count? Don't we already know that he was there? Like we already saw that he was there. He was even in the temple. He was right in the temple on the count of Omer 50. So why are we still looking for this answer? Well, let's just pick up the calendar count. On Sivan 15, this was the day that Paul continued his journey with the Roman guard to Caesarea. It was only 25 miles that day. But guess what Felix says? When he read the letter from the Romans, he said, okay, Paul, I'm going to hear your case, but I'm not going to listen until your accusers are come. Well, my goodness, it took 2 days for them to get up there. So guess what? Somebody needs to spend 2 days to go back to Jerusalem to call for the accusers. They meet up with Ananias and they give him the message that you got to come back up to Caesarea. And Ananias would have to have at least 2 days to get back up because he has to appear. He is part of the accusers. So there we have another 5 days gone. Let's pick up the story on this next calendar page. And remember, I have everything here in light gray so that you know what's been happening. Here we are at Sivan 20. Ananias arrives and the case proceeds. Look what happens. It's just before Shabbat. Just before Shabbat, all the accusations are given. I find this very interesting. No time was wasted. And oh yes, Paul was accused. He was accused of profaning the temple. Didn't he know what was going to happen? Well, what happens next? How is Paul going to answer? What is Paul going to say? And this is where it gets interesting. We're on the homeward stretch. On the 20th cycle of the 3rd month, Paul is standing before Felix in his defense. Felix says, come on, Paul, I need to hear from you too, because you already know what the accuser said. And Paul says this, after an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. Verse 18, I was ceremonial clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was a crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia. It's those Jews from Ephesus who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin. In verse 18, Paul announced that he was ceremonially clean when he was in the temple 12 days ago. That's what he said. Okay, everyone. When I found that and I was charting this, I went, oh my, where is this count going to go to? You know what? It's time to count where Paul was 12 days ago. Let's take a look and see. Let's count the 12 days. Paul said, because thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. Was Paul profaning the temple 12 days ago? Well, let's see. Let's do the count. Just count with me backwards, 12 days. And where do you land? You land in Jerusalem on Omer count number 50. And that's where Paul was 12 days ago. 12 days ago, Paul had been cleansed with the purification waters in case there was any accidental defilement. Remember, that was day 3. That was on Omer 49. Paul was not profaning the temple. No, he wasn't. He was worshiping in the temple on day 50 of the Omer count. That's exactly what Paul was doing. It is not possible for this testimony by Luke and Paul to justify a 99-day Omer count. It's not even close. But you know, that's not the end yet. And that's not really why this testimony was given in the book of Acts. The Bible has a timeline of Paul's counting example. Luke and Paul ask, has there been more than a simple Omer count study here? Will the following counsel from Paul have more meaning to you now? We read it at the beginning, and I'm going to read it again. This account in Philippians is about 7 years after this event that we just studied today. And Paul says, brethren, join in following my example and note those who so walk, as you have us for a pattern, especially Paul and Luke. And then he says in 4:9, the things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these are what you're supposed to do. And the Elohim of peace will be with you. Paul is saying, you know what? There is something going on here. There is patterns in my life of everything that I have done. Do you think that Paul is conveying to his audience to follow his example in calendar timing for Yahuwah's worship statutes? Do you think he was really serious about this? What is he talking about? He said, follow my example and those that are following me, for there is a pattern here. And what I have taught you, what you have learned, and what you've received, and what you've heard, and what you've seen in me, I want you to do these things. That is what Paul was saying. Let's start to wrap this up. Luke was a physician. He was a smart man. And Paul, he was an honor student of the Torah. He was a smart man. These were the two most qualified apostles to witness and to write of this calendar account. They recognized what was happening in year 57. And they followed the promptings of the Ruach to make sure that this account was worded with every necessary detail. And if they were not following the specifics of Yahuwah's covenant calendar, do you know what, everybody? There would have been no need to take care and record such a degree of detail and accuracy. However, the calendar events are not recorded in a way that's easy to break open. This is one huge calendar puzzle. It's following the pattern of the calendar puzzle clues that are found in the Gospels by the four writers that are following it according to Moses in the Torah. You know what I think? There must have still been dissension around the correct calendar that was supposed to be kept to honor Yahuwah's festivals. I think there was a lot of stuff going on. I think it's very obvious that the lunar calendars of that day had a strong presence, or Luke would not have taken care to record these details just for no good reason. Yes, it is true. There is not one idle word in Scripture, and the question begs to be asked, who would have ever thought that this simple ship trip would contain so many clues to support and enhance and declare the covenant calendar as Yahuwah's calendar? And I say probably a few at most. We had no idea what was here. This study is completely capable of debunking so many huge counterfeits in a variety of other calendars, just as the Joshua studies have done, following the Torah commands. The details are in this study for every individual to check for themselves. But the question is, how many are going to take the time to look and see and really do it? The following 2 slides will help to put everything together for this interesting calendar study. Before I say anything more, I want to tell you that this study, I was planning to teach it a year ago, after the sickle series number 4. But Yahuwah held it off. And then I thought, well, no, we need to do the red heifer. The sickle series needs to have the red heifer, and then we'll do this study. And we waited, and those were done. The red heifer was done at Sukkot 2020. And I just couldn't get started. I started in November, starting to break this open. It was really a brain teaser, and I wanted it ready. I needed it to go. And Tim will tell you, he knew the urgency. And y'all held it back. He held it back because of this right here, this exposure of 2 calendars in the gospel account, this study that was given January 1 of 21, called the closing minutes of Matthew 28:1 Shabbat. That study had to be given before this one. Why? Because that study proves that the lunar calendar that was being used in Judea during Yahushua's Passion Week was offset from the covenant calendar by only 12 hours, according to John's record. That study had to be given first. Because in that study, here's a few things of what covenant calendar can explain. All of the details of the Passion Week using the dawn day start with the year start on the day after the Tekufah. It proves it beyond a shadow of a doubt. It proves that the 4th cycle was a Passover on a Wednesday, not a Friday, not a Thursday. This is for Yahushua's Passover. It proves the proper alignment for the preparation of the fragrant spices by the women. It proves that the Sabbath resurrection was there. It proves that the wave sheaf placement was within the Passover festival on the 1st cycle of the week, and that's where the ascension was. That is the etzem, that is the backbone of your salvation. That's just a few things that it proves. That study is so important. That had to be given first because it breaks open what was happening with the Jews and their lunar calendar at the time of Yahushua. Getting debunked by a ship trip? Counterfeit calendars getting debunked by a ship trip? The following is a short list of counterfeits that are exposed by this teaching. The wave sheaf is not married to Abib 16. That's invalid. Go check it out. The wave sheaf on the 1st cycle cannot be outside the Passover week like Enoch's calendar says on Abib 26. That's outside the days of unleavened bread. And for Enoch clarity, Luke would have had to record their departure as many days after unleavened bread if it was on an Enoch calendar, but he didn't say that. He said after the days of unleavened bread is when we left. Luke didn't say many days after, because that would have just played right into the hands of the Dead Sea Scroll calendars. Luke's record is really silent. We need to pay attention to what the words say. These studies debunk the moon month start for the year. It debunks the year start beginning on the Tekufah. There's so many that say that the Tekufah is the first day of the new year. It is not true, friends. This proves that the lunar calendar at the time had completely transitioned to using the moon after the equinox, not the moon before the equinox, as it was being done 45 years earlier. The study that Tim has done on Yahushua's Passover when he was age 12, it only works out when you use the moon before the equinox, but somewhere between the age of 12 and Yahushua at his Passion Week, they transitioned. Their lunar calendar transitioned. I don't know what year it was, but it transitioned to using the moon after the equinox. When it comes to the moon, there's so much confusion. It's incredible. This study proves that the year had to be 57 AD because it is the only year closely associated with the lunar calendar to declare that there was a dark moon on Omer 16 with Meteorology. No other calendar year can break open this puzzle within the reasonable time frame from years 58 to 63. I already went and looked. It's not there. Only 57. This study shows that covenant calendar is beginning to really crunch other components of counterfeit calendars. There's a whole lot more coming, everyone. I didn't have time to put it in here. This is not the time. There's so much more coming. Let's wrap it up with an epilogue for Acts 20 to 24. With Luke's utmost care to amazing details of this event. It is impossible for Pentecost to be at any 99-day Omer count. It's not even possible. It's not even in the question. That's gone. And Paul is an honor student of the Torah. He knows how to calculate the Omer count according to Moses and Yahusha. He was teaching the Gentiles. He had to have the right Omer count. He knew what he was doing. He was the smart one of the bunch, remember? This fourth witness for an Omer count is about 27 years after the crucifixion. It acknowledges that all the spring festivals were still being honored and kept. It's a fourth witness, but it has so much more to it. And this witness is exactly the same calendar count as Exodus 12 with a third cycle Tuesday Passover. And I think Luke and Paul would ask you today, are there any further questions? Well, that's the end. I want to thank you for being here because it was a long study. And Tim and I just ask that Yahuwah will give you wisdom and understanding as you count out his Omer, and that hopefully you will seek to totally understand his blood ratified covenant calendar. There's so much more to it, and it is going to smack. It's going to have the last word. We already know that. This is just one more little calendar piece. So if you have any questions, you know you can send them to questions@studythecalendar.com. And thanks for being here.